Dear readers, as the Helezon magazine, we're starting a new project called 5 Continents, 5 Poets with the March issue. Our project includes interviews with poets from 5 continents of the world. Over the next months, we plan to continue the interviews, the first of which will be published this month. With this project, we hope to contribute to the world of literature and art by reflecting the universal face of literature, which is the mission of our journal, by keeping a mirror to the subtleties of art and by bringing together rich accumulations. On this occasion, while we get to know a new poet every month within the framework of the project, we will also have the opportunity to read today's poetry world from their perspectives of feelings and thoughts. Within the scope of the 5 Continents, 5 Poets project, the guest of the March issue of our magazine is Romanian poet Ilinca BERNEA. Ilinca BERNEA is novelist and poet. She also wrote theater plays and film scripts. She has a PhD in philosophy. She is also a visual artist with participations in national and international exhibitions and a Romanian Writers' Union Prize winner. She taught seminaries and kept ateliers for students from various universities of Bucharest. She specialized in the field of art theory and curatorship, being art reviewer and critic for Liternet magazine. She keeps a permanent poetry column for the same publication. She directed as an independent artist various poetry and theater performances played by professional performers. She was also awarded a prize for literature by Convorbiri Literare in 2017. Among the literary publications we mention the novel Your Name and Other Hearsays, the novel The Black Box, the novel Androgynous Legends, the volume of prose Love and Straitjacket, the volume of lyrics Erotic Stone. Dear Ilinca BERNEA, first of all, we would like to thank you for agreeing to an interview with us as part of the 5 Continents, 5 Poets project, which we started as the Helezon magazine. Now I would like to start our interview with the following question. When did you start writing poetry? How have your favorite poets influenced you? I started very early. I think I wrote my first poem when I was 12. I was very impressed at the time with modern poetry, with white verse, but I was also attracted by fixed forms, sonnets, rhymes. I wrote a gloss in high school. Constanța Budzea combined the modern spirit with the classical form. Her sonnets were amazing. She was the first poet I was drawn to, and I had the chance to meet her and be close to her. Over the years, I loved and was captivated by many others. Obviously, at first it was nothing original. All I did were variations and style exercises on given forms. At that age, in adolescence, you can only be vaguely personal. Your poetry is too related to reading and to cultural content because you do not know anything about life yet. You didn't get to have your own experiences. My favorite poet is Shakespeare. I also translated a good part of his sonnets into Romanian. Among my compatriots, I am most resonant with Matei Vișnie, Traian Coșovei, and Ruxandra Cistereanu. I am reading with much pleasure and emotion Gelu Naum, Petru Creția, Angela Furtună, Ion Mureșan, Mariana Marin, Bogdan Ghiu, Dan Coman, Violeta Pintea, Iulia Pană, Ciprian Măcișaru, Dan Sociu. There are a lot of them. Actually, these are the first names that came through my mind. The Turkish poets closest to my soul are Ataol Behramoğlu and Nilgün Marmara. But I'm also thrilled by the lyrics of Can Yücel and Efe Duyan, poets who belong to my generation. I like Pablo Neruda and a contemporary poet from Baghdad actually living in the USA, Dünya Mikhail. I much appreciate the modern Japanese poet Ryuichi Tamura and a Chinese poet named San Benbo and Nigerian Chris Abani. I also have a sensible bent towards the poetry of Nizar Kabani and Foru Farrokhzad, the famous Iranian poet. And last but not least, a good friend of mine, contemporary English poet, Sam Brenton. Is there something that you draw inspiration from when writing poetry, or that you consider indispensable? Are you looking for inspiration, or does inspiration find you? In other words, what is your source of inspiration when writing poetry? For example, do you prepare an environment while writing your poetry? Indispensable? I do not know. The sources of inspiration vary a lot. They are never the same. My poetry has a philosophical stake, so the theme can be inspired by anything from love to human stupidity. I write wherever and whenever I feel like. When I walk a lot, especially in the summer days, I like to wander. I have a notebook with me. If I have a sudden flash, I stop at a bench on the street and write. You were born in Romania. You spent some time in England. How does this situation affect your poems? Those were my best years. I lived there my great love story. I mean the true passion, mad desire, deep feelings and longing, the whole package. Of course, this radically changed not only my poetry but my whole way of seeing existence. Love, when it's mutual, is always an epiphany. As far as I know, you can read and write in 3 languages. Multilingualism undoubtedly gives your work more richness and diversity. What would you like to say about this topic? French is my second mother tongue and I'm fluent in English indeed. I am also a translator of poetry from English. I perceive myself as having different styles in each language. And not slightly different. It's not only a matter of vocabulary, the language is organically connected to certain types of sensibility. There is a genius of each. I have a different humor in French than in Romanian, and I certainly have more humor in English. Besides, I'm less synthetic in Romanian. Latin people like chatting a lot. They love extending and expanding the subjects. My poetry is coined for Romanian, for sure. When I translate it in English, the result is basically another poem. Is a good poet also a good reader of poetry? What are the subtleties of reading poetry? Somehow, inevitably. Artists, I think, have a deficiency of aesthetic emotion, as some have a glucose or serotonin deficiency, calcium or iron deficiency. They are addicted to a kind of inner burning that only poetry, art, or love can give. We're talking here about a type of intimate need. Of course, the appetite for knowledge or for understanding, for communication also produces an analogous syndrome. The relationship with art is not a choice, it's not leisure, but a kind of fever, a pressure, almost compulsive. Contact with poetry and various other sources of beauty for me is a vital necessity. What do you think is the way to capture universal language and themes in poetry? For example, how effective is poetry in terms of freedom and human rights? I don't know what to say. From a certain perspective, a subject could be political. In a society like the postmodern consumerist ones, which are so pragmatic, cynical, and ego-oriented, writing about romantic love or traditional values could be a humanist protest with political implications. Every public speech and everything we express in a way that is intended for a wide audience could have political consequences. There is always a social and cultural mainstream. I think that good artists are somehow subversive in their works. They oppose, more or less obviously, the dominant discourse or values or criticize them, or at least disagree with some of them to some extent. In the world in which I live, the dominant discourse is already configured in humanist terms, apparently at least. The paradigm of postmodernism is mainstream. It has its excesses and abusive approaches and views, as any others. As an artist, I embrace a philosophy, for sure. I stand for what I do cherish and is about to disappear in our times for endangered values. There are of course some social issues that concern me in the highest degree. There are few monsters that my poetry faces. Poverty, human trafficking, social isolation and marginalization, rejection, solitude, abusive behaviors, the hidden or evident misery of the metropolitan life. Every poem has a story, even if it is small. Do you have a poem whose story you can forget? Can you share with us? I believe, like ancient Greeks, that poetry is not necessarily words related, that it is the core of all the arts. It is the deep essence of an aesthetic experience. So to me, poetry is rather a state of grace that can shape words or movements or gestures or smiles, exchanges of gazes. Poetry is not only a textual matter, for sure. Even body language has its stories and its associated poetry for someone who has eyes to notice it. My poetic texts are sometimes connected to a life story, some other times to philosophical insights. I remember every single plot in the background of every single poem I ever wrote. You write not only poetry, at the same time you write works such as novels and plays. You have also won awards for some of your work in these genres. What types of literature are you interested in, besides poetry? I am mostly interested in life. I consider myself an existentialist. Literature is a secondary way of exploring life. I love the 20th century literature more. The writers that I appreciate are all great humanists and existentialists. Albert Camus, Marguerite Yourcenar, Hermann Hesse, Aldous Huxley, Stanisław Lem, André Malraux, Alexander Isaievich Solzhenitsyn, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, Thomas Mann, Heinrich Boll, Marguerite Duras, Jorge Luis Borges, Vladimir Nabokov, Italo Calvino, Milan Kundera, Danilo Kiss. From the 21st century, my very favorite is by far Orhan Pamuk. I appreciate many genres, from science fiction to war drama or travel diaries, but the most I read and write, philosophy. This is my academic training. As we come to the end of our questions, what are your suggestions for those who are interested in poetry, reading poetry, and especially writing and wanting to write poetry? I usually avoid giving advices because I dislike to be advised. Thank you. Thank you for giving us your precious time as Helezon magazine. I thank you too. A poem by Ilinca. Don't forget to buy bread. When I was a child and I studied piano, I always heard a voice in my head. Don't forget to buy bread. Do not forget. Until I gave up the instrument and started writing, it didn't spare me. As I sat on the stool as it began, I wrote what I wrote and started again. Now, what do you want from me? I would slap it in the face, but it's a voice. No matter how annoying it would be, voices cannot be grabbed by the collar and thrown out in the street. I bought bread for an entire neighborhood. I kept buying bread, and it doesn't leave me alone. As I sit at the desk, it starts again. See, you always forget to buy bread. Yes, you're right, bloody voice. I am a loser, an unbearable one. I have an ugly and lazy character. I am capricious and passionate. I had a difficult teenage and an even more terrible youth. Leave me alone. I've only been eating raw vegetables for 10 years. I also quit smoking a long time ago. And music. I don't even write seriously. I'm just pretending, like when I was a kid and I was imitating handwriting, putting down on paper lines and curves without meaning. Even now my words make no sense. You know, I do nothing else but to carry crates full of bread as high as the church walls. And I have no one to feed.